You must try your best, and that's the best anybody can do. My dear father.
I'm going to church. I'm going to church.
Oh.
Oh my God! They killed Kenny! You bastards!
Netflix released Guillermo Del Toro's latest take on an old fairy tale with Pinocchio. This was certainly a highly anticipated front from the man considering his body of work, where he tries to add a different spin to these classic stories, sometimes putting a darker take on it that tends to leave a good impression. For me, a few of them can be a little bit, but we're neither here nor there. Not to mention his pure respect for the medium of animation. It's also kind of odd to think that this is the third of Pinocchio movies to come out within a year of each other. We're living in a simulation and it pretty much glitched. But at least this stands as the best of them. There's a clear passion behind this film that we're able to see come through as you watch it. There was even more hype when it was discovered that it was co-written by Patrick McHale, the creator of Over the Garden Wall. Alright, now keep it in your pants, y'all. It's safe to say this was a great pairing with these two at the helm. Now, you might be wondering about what the story is. Honestly, it plays it fairly straightforward from the original story, like, it's pretty much in that ballpark. It'd be amazing if you didn't know already, but I'll recite anyway. Geppetto is a woodmaker who loses his son in a tragic accident. In a drunken stupor, he decides to carve a puppet out of wood, hoping to replace the son that he lost. One night, a blue fairy visits and brings the puppet to life, now with the name Pinocchio. Now Pinocchio has to learn life lessons while gaining the love of his father. You're all probably thinking this does sound as straightforward as you can get with this type of story, but there's a unique set of differences here. For one thing, it plays straightforward for the beginning, but it does deviate enough that it's like, okay, we're in different territory. For one thing, Geppetto is not a loving father right off the bat. For instance, Geppetto honestly doesn't really like Pinocchio in the beginning. He's a bit more scared and somewhat resentful of him. You just get this feeling of, oh my god, there's this thing in my house and I don't know what it is or why it's talking to me or why it's calling me Papa. But you kind of understand why he is acting so resentful and scared of him because, well, he lost his son. His real flesh and blood son, and now this new thing is in his house just doing all this extra stuff and breaking some of his shit, so you kind of get why he's a little bit freaked out or stressed. And then you have Pinocchio just immediately calling him Papa and just trying to make him love him, so you kind of get why Geppetto's just not really ready to move on like that, especially with something that's just basically a freak of nature. He needs proper time to adjust to this new setting for him, and as the movie goes on, you actually see him getting to love and appreciate Pinocchio. That's pretty different for what you usually get. Usually it's just right off the bat, he just loves his son unconditionally, but here he actually has to learn to love his son, so it allows for him to have his own arc. It just puts a bit more substance into Geppetto rather than just leaving him as a basic parent that had a want and just out of nowhere gets that want fulfilled. It's a good spin that I think many other iterations could take a lesson from with this one. Now, Pinocchio himself is definitely different from what you might expect. In the original, he was basically a little shit stain that ended up getting hanged. Truly is amazing how dark the original stories that we were told could be. In the Disney one, he was just some kid who could get into trouble because of his naivete, but here he's more just an excitable and curious kid that gets pulled into trouble more than anything. There's no real bad intentions in him or any of him being too naive and getting tricked too much or something on that level. It's more he has a bit of his wits about him, but he still acts somewhat like an actual kid. Basically someone you can manipulate to a degree, but he has more of a side of good to him that allows him to see right through people's crap. If anything, that kinda makes him somewhat of a Dudley Do-Right. He learns his lesson a bit early, and through the film, we're seeing him do the right thing, but the world is just more working against him. Definitely a different way to tell the tale that makes this stand out above other Pinocchio iterations. Not to mention the unique look they gave him. They decided to stick with a more wooden finish for him, and it honestly makes him seem more outer world otherworldly, and so you can understand why people would freak out more, whereas like say the Disney version, he does look way too reminiscent of an actual real boy, save for, you know, the screws in him or his joints. Here it's a more dynamic design that honestly I could see many people wanting like actual figures for. It has a bit of a toyegetic side to it. Now the lesson here is definitely one I think will resonate with people really well. It does play on the idea of being a bad child and facing consequences, but its spin here is that a little rule breaking is okay as long as it's for the greater good. It doesn't just keep things overly simple like say let's be a good kid and do right and go to school and all that dandy crap. It makes it clear that if something feels wrong, you shouldn't follow along with it. That's a nice way to add a more refreshing take and kind of blur the lines, make things a bit more gray on these very classic lessons that we used to be taught. Instead of just leaving it at black and white, hey, don't lie, it actually says sometimes lying can help get you out of certain things, like actual problems that you need to get out of. It understands that gray area and really pushes it properly that I think others would usually fumble in this sense. You really gotta say kudos to how they were able to handle that here, because it easily could have been messed up. Of course, with this being a Pinocchio story, there's the cricket who's named Sebastian this time around. He does act somewhat as a guide to Pinocchio for this movie, but for the most part, he gets squished, which is just plain hilarious. Kind of a callback to the original story since he gets killed by Pinocchio, but here's him just getting squished by others or the environment around him, which gives this version an edge. Speaking of edge, this movie can get dark at times. There's a slight sense of dread somewhat that you feel, and that ends up coming from this taking place in World War II Italy. Yeah, it kinda doubles as a war movie in a small sense, which brings me to a bit of the negatives with this film. The war aspect is not really utilized that well here, I feel. It just feels somewhat tacked on a bit, honestly. It doesn't build on Pinocchio's character too much and feels more like it's about these other characters who don't really feel that relevant. Honestly, it just kind of adds a conflict to add a conflict. It just feels like we just need this thing here for the sake of it being here to kind of fill out the story a little bit. Though I will admit it helps the lesson they're going for, but it probably could have been implemented better or just probably done without using an actual regime that was in World War II, because they use Mussolini and it's a little uncomfortable. Obviously it's played as a bad thing and they even make fun of the regime, but you could have easily done this with like a made-up regime and it probably would still hit just as hard. There's also the circus plot point that you might remember from like the original story, but here it's done a little bit better for them than the World War II aspect, but it kinda can drag a little bit, which makes you feel how long this movie actually is, because it's a 2-hour movie and you can start to feel it in the middle part. It doesn't have the strongest flow, honestly. The resolution does work with this plot, but you might be wanting just a little bit less out of how much they're giving you. Also, I should mention this is a musical, and I will say it works for the movie, but you might not be putting the songs on your playlist anytime soon. But back to some of the positives I actually have with this movie. The animation is phenomenal. The use of stop motion calls for a lot of unique movements with Pinocchio. Of course, stop motion is a sort of puppetry, so Pinocchio himself is right at home here. It just moves very uniquely, and you just love seeing how all the characters can move very smoothly as well. At some point, you might be thinking, was this just all computer generated? But it's like, no, they actually do move these puppets this smoothly, and it's just amazing to witness. There's also these absolutely gorgeous backgrounds that you could put on a canvas and just hang up on a wall. They are a chef's kiss to look at. So all in all, this is a great film that stands as a strong take on the Pinocchio story. The great animation pushes more than any other iteration has. The unique take on the characters adds a freshness that I'm sure many can enjoy. The slight hiccups might distract you, but it's not that distracting. You can still very much have a good time with this film. It's most certainly one Pinocchio film that doesn't give a wooden performance.